and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. This past week has seen a flurry of international activity at the highest levels of the government and defence establishments of many countries and blocs, from the US and Canada to countries across the EU and NATO. What has spurred this sense of urgency, and how do we expect things to evolve? Well, to get a sense of how all of this is being received in Ukraine, we're joined by Stefan Korshak, Senior Defense Correspondent at the Kyiv Post and a regular guest. Stefan, welcome back to TVP World. Thanks for taking the time.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure as always, sir. Now, I'd like to start with what we think, or what Ukrainians believe, Trump's reaction is going to be to Putin, who seems to be dragging his feet.
I think that the Ukrainians are not expecting the Americans to jump towards putting sanctions on Russia. They seem to be of the opinion that the Trump White House would prefer to be friendly with Russia if at all possible. And they believe that the Russians have no interest in a ceasefire and trying to drag things out. So they're a little bit hopeful that the Americans will put pressure on the Russians, but they are not expecting it anytime soon, I think.
Although Marco Rubio has said that President Trump isn't interested in negotiations about negotiations, and that seems to hint at some kind of action. If he does take action, what would you like to see him do?
Well, just to be fair, it's not up to me; it's up to the Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians, in an ideal world, would very much appreciate more precision-guided weapons that really only the Americans could make. And also, probably top of the line is heavy missiles, Patriot air defense missiles that are really the only weapon system that can protect Ukrainian cities from Russian ballistic missiles. A ballistic missile hit an apartment block in Kryvyi Rog yesterday, and the latest statistics are 18 people killed, 6 children. And that's what the Ukrainians probably want the most, is more equipment to defend themselves from America, from Russian air attacks.
Understood. Of course, something that President Zelensky has been calling for, since the start of the war, an increase in supply. Now, moving on to proposals by the British and French governments to actually transfer soldiers into Ukraine. How's that being received?
Very positively. They are making a clear distinction, both on the government level and on just the average person on the street level, between the United States and Europe. There is a very strong feeling that Europe has Ukraine's back if the United States doesn't, particularly. France, Britain, and Poland and the Baltic states are generally considered the ones that are most supportive of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are very, very grateful of that. That being said, I think that the general view is that how Western forces might come to Ukraine and in what capacity, I think everybody understands that it's really very much an open question, and it's being discussed. And when it might actually be on the ground, unclear at this point.
Well, Putin has, on a number of occasions, said that, the presence of foreign troops in Ukraine would be a dramatic escalation. Is there a sense that the response from Putin and Russia, generally the military, is going to be, even worse than it currently is? No,
the Ukrainians are far beyond that. They are at war with Russia. They understand that, in their view, at least, the people in the Kremlin are Ukraine's enemy, that there is no negotiating with people like that, and that whatever Russia could do to Ukraine, Russia has already tried to do to Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are absolutely sure that they can resist and will resist. So the presence of foreign troops in Ukraine, that's a sovereign Ukrainian decision. The Ukrainians think that it's absurd that Russia should have some kind of agency over that Ukrainian decision.
Right. Now, in terms of the role, you say that it's currently being discussed, but is there an expectation that those soldiers would be on the front lines, actually, supporting Ukrainian troops, or some kind of rear guard type of action?
Well, the very short answer to that question is it's being discussed. President Zelensky gave some good detail on that yesterday evening, and he pointed out that the real question is the mandate. That is, what are going to be the rules of the engagement of any international troops that might come to Ukraine. That being said, he also gave detail on what's being discussed between the countries, France, Britain, and Ukraine, and it's on the level of Army general staffs, military general staffs. And it's really a discussion about how those states could add to Ukraine's security on the air, on the sea, on the land, and in air defense. There is really no clear discussion. There's nothing even resembling a discussion of Western troops on the front lines. From an operational point of view, the front is much too large for any force short of, I don't know, the People's Republic of China to actually line up troops and secure Ukraine that way. So it's a question of what weapon systems and troop types could international contingents bring to the table, and what parts of Ukrainian security could they assist with. A simple example would be Western air forces helping protect portions of Ukrainian airspace, but it's all under discussion.
Understood. Now, there has been some talk, and I'm referring again to ceasefire negotiations. There has been some talk of setting a deadline for a decision by Putin to make a decision about the ceasefire, about agreeing to the ceasefire proposal. Would setting a deadline actually make any difference, do you think?
That's a difficult question, because the answer to it is inside the head of Vladimir Putin. I guess the answer would be what consequences would there be for Russia were the deadline to be missed. So if for instance, the White House were to say Russia must come to the table and agree to a ceasefire without conditions by this date, and there are no consequences attached to that, then I think the Russians would probably ignore it. But if there was a list of weapon systems that the Americans would automatically hand over to the Ukrainians, then I doubt that the Russians would immediately come to the table, but they might start talking behind the scenes. The general view is that Russia does not want to come to the peace table. That's what Zelensky said yesterday evening, and that's widely believed in Ukraine. So the question is, how could Russia be forced to come to negotiations? There
is a risk, though, for Putin, isn't there, if he does meet the deadline, in that people, he'll be perceived to be kowtowing to American pressure, which is, of course, bad for his image at home. Do you think that might be a factor in his thinking?
Absolutely. The Ukrainians say that one of the reasons that the Russians don't want to come to the negotiating table, at least in their view, is that Russia does not have a good path to get to peace that does not seriously undermine the authority of the Kremlin. So if any step towards peace is going to be perceived in Russia as weakness by the people of Russia and by those competing parts of the Russian national leadership that might want to get a shot at the Kremlin themselves. And Vladimir Putin has to preserve, first of all, his life, and second of all, his political legacy. And there's no easy way to do it by ending the war. Meanwhile, continuing the war prevents him from being forced into a decision. And from the Ukrainian perspective, that's a big reason the war is continuing, because there is no way for Russia to end the fighting without seriously damaging the authority of the national leadership that's in the Kremlin right now.
Right. Well, there's much more to say about that, but I'd like to move on, given our constraints regarding time. We had Putin's envoy, Kirill Dmitriev, visiting Washington recently. What's the word on the street about that meeting, or those meetings?
Well, in Ukraine, it's being rubbished. They see the Dmitry visit as simply Russian window dressing, attempting to trick the silly and fairly ignorant Americans into possibly believing that Russia is a peaceful country that doesn't want to hurt anybody and really wants peace. Again, Zelensky yesterday evening called Dmitriev bald-faced, a liar, and somebody who has come to Washington to simply tell tales. And so it's not taken seriously, at least on the official level in Ukraine at all. From the Ukrainian perspective, negotiating with Russia is very much a losing proposition unless you have real force behind it. And they see the Russians visiting America to a great extent, simply the Russians, who are very good at duplicitous diplomacy, using their skills against the naive Americans. That being said, if the Americans see through it and react to it, then the Ukrainians will change that point of view. But at this point, they haven't.
Understood. Now, I'd like to ask about President Zelensky. How is his performance being viewed by Ukrainians in the way that he has prosecuted this war, this defensive war?
Generally positively, but there's a big asterisk next to it. Some of the supporters of Zelensky abroad seem to see him as an incarnation of Winston Churchill or Franklin Roosevelt. And that's not how he's seen in Ukraine. He's seen in Ukraine, I would say, primarily as a fairly experienced politician who has become experienced and who is doing a fairly good job, but certainly not a perfect job. And there is a political opposition. They criticize the presidential administration at times. And the general feeling is that were an election to be held today, probably a presidential election, probably Zelensky would win, but there would be a competition. It wouldn't be. He wouldn't skate through.
Understood.
He's seen as the leader of the country, but far from the only person making decisions and influencing the war. The feeling in Ukraine is that it's the people on the line fighting that are the key people.
Unfortunately, Stefan, we're going to have to end it there, but thank you, as always, for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
Yeah, you too, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now. And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.